My son counted each drop out loud. 9, 10, 11. Each drop fell into a glass of water my daughter-in-law had already poured and set down right where I'd be sitting, before I'd even reached the table. I drank every last drop. I even looked up, smiled, and thanked them. Because never in my life had I imagined there would come a day when I'd have to be wary of my own son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, taught to ride a bike along the canal, sat up through whole nights with when his fever burned him into delirium. That's the part I still can't get past. I smiled at him. I told him the gravy was wonderful. And 40 minutes later I was standing in their kitchen, my hands trembling around something I was never meant to see, while their laughter still drifted through the wall, as if nothing in the world was wrong. And in that very moment, my whole life shattered. My name is Harold Whitlock. I'm 74. I spent 41 years as a marine surveyor on the docks and rivers of the Northwest, certifying which vessels were sound and which would sink if you trusted them. I could read a hull the way some men read a newspaper. What I couldn't read, it turns out, was my own son's face across a Sunday table. And I need to tell you this story, all of it, because I've carried it long enough now that I understand something I didn't understand then, that the people most able to destroy you are the ones you've already decided to trust. If you've ever loved someone who was quietly doing you harm, this one is for you. Stay with me. It gets worse before it gets clear. Let me take you back to how ordinary it all was. Because that's the thing nobody warns you about. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives smelling of roast lamb. It was a Wednesday in March when Daniel rang. I was in the front room of my terrace in Chorlton, South Manchester, a house I've owned for 28 years, with a cup of tea going cold and the rain doing what Manchester rain does. The phone buzzed. Daniel. Miss Son. Dad. You coming Sunday? Rachel's been planning it all week. I asked him what the occasion was. There wasn't one, he said, which is exactly why it mattered. Just a proper family lunch. Slow roast lamb, the rosemary potatoes you like. Rachel's doing that lemon tart. And there it was, the lemon tart. I'd mentioned once, 18 months earlier, that her lemon tart was the best thing I'd eaten all year, he remembered. That detail is probably what did it. I almost said no, not for any real reason. Just the settled comfort of an old man who's grown fond of his own quiet. But it had been a month and more since I'd seen him, and the boy remembered the lemon tart, so I said yes. I said I'd bring a bottle of something decent. He told me to come hungry. I hung up and I felt good. I felt wanted. I want you to hold on to that, because everything that happened grew out of a father being glad his son had called. I spent 0 seconds thinking anything was wrong. Sunday came gray and bright the way March can. That hard northern light that makes everything look scrubbed. I had a shower, put on my good gray trousers and a clean shirt, stopped at the wine shop on Barlow Moor Road for a bottle of Rioja, and drove out to Daniel and Rachel's place in Didsbury. They've got one of those big Edwardian semis, red brick, a tidy front garden. Rachel fusses over like it owes her money. The kind of house that tells you the owner is doing well without quite saying it out loud. I pulled up behind my brother's Range Rover and sat for a moment with the engine ticking, looking at the warm light in the windows, smelling the lamb already through the glass. Lovely, I thought. This is going to be a lovely afternoon. Rachel opened the door before I'd knocked, apron on, hair tied back, and she pulled me into a hug that, I'll be honest, surprised me. Rachel isn't a hugger. But it was a family Sunday, and people loosen up, don't they? I thought nothing of it. Harold, bang on time. Give me your coat. Daniel came out of the lounge with his hand already out for the wine. Dad, you look well. Come in, come in. And there was Brian, my younger brother, 56, parked on the sofa with a whiskey and the football on. He lifted the glass. Now then, Harold. I dropped into the armchair across from him and asked how long he was stopping with them. He shrugged, swirled the ice. Couple of weeks yet. Maybe through to Easter. Divorce is a rotten business, Harold. It is, I agreed. And we sat and watched the football in that comfortable male silence that doesn't need filling. The house smelled extraordinary. Rachel had laid the dining table properly. Cloth napkins, the good plates, candles not yet lit. Everything was completely, perfectly normal. I cannot stress that enough. About 20 minutes before we sat down, Daniel came in from the kitchen holding a small dark bottle. Brown glass, minimalist label, the sort of packaging that signals it costs more than it ought to. Dad, before I forget, he held it out. Rachel's got us seeing this nutritionist. She put us onto these heavy metal detox drops, all natural. Apparently most people our age are carrying round years of environmental toxins and haven't a clue. Does wonders for the energy, she reckons. I looked at the bottle. I looked at my son. Daniel, I'm not taking supplements from a nutritionist I've never met. Dad, I take what mine tells me to take. It's not medicine. It's a supplement, like a vitamin. He perched on the arm of the sofa. I've been on them 3 weeks. Rachel, too. You said you were knackered back end of February, remember, on the phone? I had said that. A passing comment about feeling run down after a long fortnight. He'd remembered. It's completely natural, he went on. No interactions, I checked. I turned the bottle over. The label listed botanical extracts, trace minerals, distilled water. Nothing alarming. Nothing that looked remotely like a drug. My son had remembered an offhand grumble about being tired and gone and bought me something for it. And in that moment, I was touched. Properly, warmly touched. A few drops then, I said. Go on. Rachel appeared in the doorway right then, apron off now, carrying a glass of sparkling water. I've already poured you one, Harold. It's tasteless, honestly. You won't even know it's there. Daniel measured the drops himself, careful, counting. 11 of them. I watched him do it the way you half-watch any small domestic thing without attaching a scrap of meaning to it. Cheers, Dad. Cheers, I said, and I drank it. Now, if you've ever trusted someone completely, so completely that the idea of suspecting them never even forms, then you know there's no alarm bell for this. There's no instinct that fires. Your own love is the blindfold. I keep asking myself, would I do anything differently? And honestly, I don't know that I would have. How do you guard against your own son? Tell me, because I still don't have the answer. Lunch was everything he'd promised. Rachel's lamb fell off the bone. Rosemary potatoes crisped just right, proper gravy, a cauliflower cheese that took real effort. Brian opened a bottle of red he'd brought. We talked the way families do the football first, then house prices because you can't avoid it round here, then Brian telling a story about a prang on the M60 that was far funnier in his telling than it had any right to be. Daniel was relaxed. Rachel was warm. The candles were lit. I was happy. And then, somewhere between the second helping and reaching for the gravy, it arrived without a word of warning. My mouth went dry. Completely, suddenly dry, like a tap shut off behind my teeth. I reached for my water and noticed, in a far-off, puzzled way, that my hand felt slightly disconnected from the instruction I'd given it. A faint metallic taste spread along the back of my tongue. Something wasn't right. I set my fork down quietly and took a breath. The room hadn't moved, but something in my balance had shifted by a fraction. Warm, then not warm. Am I coming down with something? I genuinely thought I was getting ill. A bug. The start of a cold. I'm 74, the body sends memos now without explaining itself. You all right, Dad? Daniel's voice, from across the table. Fine, I said. Just a bit warm. Rachel, this lamb is something special. She glowed. I kept eating, kept talking, but the metallic taste stayed, and the wrongness in my head didn't pass the way a head rush does. It just quietly deepened. Maybe some water will shift it. Excuse me a moment, I said, folding my napkin. I'll get a glass from the kitchen. Rachel half rose. I'll get it, but I waved her down. Sit, sit. I know where the tap is. The kitchen was cool and quiet after the warmth of the dining room. I filled a glass and stood at the counter, drinking slow, waiting for whatever this was to pass. It didn't pass. I set the glass down and my hand, still not quite mine, caught the edge of a tea towel and sent it sliding off the worktop. It drifted down and tucked itself into the narrow gap between the cupboard and the bin. I bent to fetch it, and that's when I saw the blister pack. It was wedged in the shadow of that gap, torn, half crumpled, pushed back far enough that you'd never see it standing up. A corner of foil with the clinical block lettering that belongs to prescription medicine, not a kitchen drawer. Someone in this house is poorly and hasn't said. That was my first thought, my only thought. The straightforward worry of a father and an older brother, wondering which of them was quietly dealing with something. Daniel's blood pressure had been up last year. Brian had mentioned dizzy spells in the summer. I picked it up and turned it over. Hyoscine. I didn't know what it was. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I wasn't alarmed by the name. I was concerned, the way any parent is concerned, finding out a family member's on medication you knew nothing about. I took out my phone to look it up to understand what they were facing, to know whether to say something or leave well alone. I typed it in. The results loaded. I read the first entry, then I read it again. Eocene caution in elderly patients. Effects include acute disorientation, profound short-term memory loss, episodes of confusion that may present as early-stage dementia. The glass of water was still in my hand. From the dining room came Brian's laugh at something, loud and easy and completely normal, and underneath it the soft clatter of a family finishing Sunday lunch. Elderly patients. Memory loss. Confusion that may present as dementia. I stood completely still in my son's kitchen, and I let the information arrange itself in front of me the way survey data arranges itself, when you're checking the figures on a hull and one number won't sit right. The drops. 11 of them, carefully counted. Rachel already holding the glass. You said you were knackered, remember? No, it's not possible. The room tilted slightly, and I understood with a cold and horrible clarity that the tilt had nothing to do with the cold or the wine or the warm afternoon. It had been in my glass before I'd even sat down. I stood at that sink with the tap running and a torn blister pack trembling in my hand, and I felt my mind, my sharp, ordered, 41-year surveyor's mind begin to reach toward a possibility so monstrous that every decent instinct I had was still trying to throw it back. If you've ever had your own mind tell you a truth your heart point blank refuses, you know that exact feeling. It's like standing on a deck you've certified as sound and feeling it move under your feet. I folded the blister pack and slipped it into my breast pocket. I turned off the tap. I picked up my glass. I walked back to that dining room, sat down, smiled at my family, reached for the cauliflower cheese, and I said nothing. Because I didn't know yet. Not for certain. But something had changed in that kitchen that I could never change back. Before I left, Daniel pressed 2 brand-new sealed bottles of the drops into my hands at the door. Take them every day, Dad. You'll feel so much better. I looked at my son's face. Open, warm, smiling, and I searched it the way you search a survey report for the flaw you're praying isn't there. I will, I said. Thank you, son. I walked to the car. I sat in the dark a moment before I started the engine. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. Maybe there's a sensible explanation for all of it. I drove home to Charlton and sat at my kitchen table and stared at that blister pack for a very long time. Then I picked up the phone, not because I was certain, because I needed to be sure. And what I found out, I was not ready for. There's a moment in a man's life when the ground shifts under him, and nothing ever looks the same again. Mine came at 20 to midnight on a wet Sunday in Chorlton, alone at my kitchen table. I hadn't touched the bottles. They sat where I'd put them, under the ceiling light, like 2 small exhibits in a case that hadn't been named yet. I'd read everything I could find on Hyoscine by then. Medical databases. Pharmacology notes. A research paper on anticholinergic toxicity in older patients that I read twice, even though half of it needed a second tab to decode. I'm a surveyor. When a number won't add up, I don't stop at the first easy answer. I follow it down to the foundations. What I found had no good foundation. Hyoscine wasn't a supplement. It wasn't a wellness product. It was a controlled prescription drug with a narrow, safe window, used in specific, monitored medical situations. What it was not was an ingredient in an all-natural detox bottle handed to a 74-year-old man over Sunday lunch. But maybe there's an explanation. The reasonable part of me kept on. Maybe it's a contaminated batch, a mislabeled product. Maybe whoever dropped that pack has a real prescription, and this is all a terrible coincidence. I wanted that to be true. I am a father. I wanted an innocent explanation more than I have ever wanted anything in my life. But the surveyor in me kept returning to one detail I couldn't sand away. 11 drops, carefully counted, Rachel already holding the glass. I picked up the phone and I rang my daughter. Now I have to tell you about Claire. Claire lives in Bristol. She's 31, a solicitor, sharp as a chisel and twice as precise. She left Manchester 6 years ago after a vicious, irreparable falling out with Daniel over their late mother's jewelry. A row I now believe Daniel engineered from start to finish, to remove the one person in this family who would never, ever be fooled by him. At the time, I didn't see it that way. At the time, I stood on Daniel's drive watching Claire's taillights vanish down the road and told myself it was just siblings being siblings. I'd been wrong about that. I'd been wrong about a great many things. Claire and I had kept ourselves quietly together over those years. Phone calls, visits when Daniel wasn't about, a careful navigation around the crack down the middle of the family. She never asked me to choose. I never made her feel she'd lost. But ringing her near midnight about her brother felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I crossed it anyway. She answered on the second ring. Dad. Instantly awake. Claire doesn't do groggy. It's nearly midnight. What's wrong? I need you to listen, I said, all the way through. Don't interrupt till I'm done. A beat. Go on. And I told her everything. The call on Wednesday. The lunch. The drops. Daniel measuring 11 of them into a glass Rachel had already poured. The way it hit me mid-meal. The dry mouth. The metallic taste. The room tilting. The tea towel. The gap by the bin. The blister pack. The search at the sink with the tap running. The 2 sealed bottles pushed into my hands at the door with a smile. Take them every day, Dad. I talked for 11 minutes straight. Claire told me afterward she'd timed it. When I finished, the line went so quiet I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Claire? I'm here. Her voice had changed. The midnight alertness had hardened into something else. A stillness I recognized. I'd heard it once before when she was 15 and found a deputy head fiddling the attendance records for failing athletes. She took the man apart so methodically he'd resigned before the governors had finished reading her file. That stillness, that gear change. Don't touch the bottles, she said. I'm not. Are they sealed? Both of them? Factory sealed. And the blister pack. In front of me. Good. I heard her moving. Bristol, the far side of the country, and I could picture her exactly up, barefoot, laptop, already open on the worktop. I need you to send me everything first thing in the morning. The pack and both sealed bottles. Courier, signed for, not the post. A pause. Pay cash. And Dad, don't put your own name on the return label. Don't put your name on the return label. That sentence landed differently from all the others. Because that wasn't a daughter being careful. That was a solicitor treating this as evidence. What are you thinking? I asked, though part of me already knew, and didn't want the whole of it yet. I'm thinking I need to know what's actually in those bottles before either of us says another word. Controlled. Precise. Can you do what I'm asking? Yes. Then get some sleep. I'll ring you at 7. She rang at 5 too. Now, honestly, if that had been me on the other end, hearing my own father describe what he'd just described, I don't know that I could have stayed that calm. I don't know that I could have thought about couriers and cash, and return labels. I think I'd have been in the car. But Claire understood something I'm only now learning. Rage is loud and useless. Evidence is quiet and unstoppable. Remember that. It's the whole story, really. I posted it all from a courier office in the city the next morning. For the return name, I used my neighbor Frank, a retired postman 2 doors down who owed me a favor from a building dispute I'd helped him through. Frank didn't ask questions. Good man. I paid cash, watched the package go behind the counter, and stood on the pavement afterward with my hands in my coat pockets, looking up at a flat gray Manchester sky. What am I doing, I thought. What is this? This is my son. I gave myself exactly 1 minute to hope I was a daft old man who'd read too many medical websites on a sleepless night. Then I got in the car and drove home. 4 days later, Thursday morning, I was in the front room pretending to read a book. Pretending, because I'd read the same paragraph 14 times without keeping a single word of it. The phone was on the cushion beside me. It rang at 10 past 10. The lab results are back. Claire's voice. No greeting. I set the book down. I rushed them. I know people at an independent toxicology lab. They owed me a fast turnaround. A breath. Dad, I need you to stay calm. I was already not calm. Tell me. Both bottles. The sealed ones. The all-natural detox drops. A pause that I felt in my chest. They're laced with hyoscine, concentrated, well above any safe medical dose. The toxicologist flagged it the moment he saw it. His written report uses a phrase, I'm reading it straight off the page, consistent with intentional poisoning. The front room went very quiet. Outside, a bus groaned up the road. A completely ordinary sound on a completely ordinary Thursday. Intentional poisoning. How concentrated? I asked. Because I'm a surveyor, and I needed the number, even when the number was going to be the thing that finished me. Concentrated enough that taken daily, the way Daniel told you to take it, The buildup in a man your age would produce rapid, severe cognitive symptoms, repeated disorientation, big memory gaps, confusion serious enough that anyone watching you over 2 or 3 weeks would have a very convincing medical record of decline. Short sentences. My brain had stopped processing long ones. They needed me to look like I was losing my mind, I said. They needed documentation, Claire said. Medical, witnessed. And there's more. A pause. I ran a check on your property. Someone pulled a full valuation and title search on your house and your savings back in mid-February. The request didn't come from a bank, Dad. It came from a solicitor, a man called Marcus Hale, out of Leeds. Another pause, the kind where you feel yourself standing at an edge with no rail. I made some calls. Hale has a reputation in the worst corners of the profession. He handles predatory guardianships. He quietly maps out wealthy older people, coaches the family on how to document their decline, and has them draft a guardianship and financial deputyship application in advance. It sits in his office, fully written, just waiting for the family to trigger a medical crisis or a failed assessment. The moment you slip, they file it, and a judge strips you of the legal right to manage your own affairs. Your money, your home, everything, under Daniel's control. My estate, the house. 41 years of careful, disciplined saving, built the way I built everything slowly, structurally, with the long view. A conservative figure, north of £3.5 million. My son looked at his 74-year-old father and saw £3.5 million. I sat in my front room and felt something happen in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot and fast. This was cold. This was structural. This was the feeling of a load-bearing wall giving way in slow motion, knowing exactly what's about to come down. Brian signed it, I said. It wasn't a question. Brian's listed as a supporting signatory. A pause. Dad Brian moved into that house in January. I sat with that. My brother, 56, recently divorced, recently skinned, turning up on Daniel's doorstep 2 months before that lunch, with his Range Rover and his whiskey and his comfortable spot on the sofa. Suddenly, the timeline had a completely different shape. They bought him, I said quietly. That's my read, Claire said. His name on that application isn't a confused brother making a daft call. That's a man choosing financial survival. I closed my eyes, and the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Brian's sudden divorce, his sudden stay, the endless whiskey. My brother hadn't fallen on hard times. He'd sold his loyalty to my son for a slice of my life's work. Daniel supplied the professional machinery. Brian supplied the inside-the-family validation. It was a hostile takeover of a father's mind. I want to stop here for a second, because I think this is the part that matters most. I keep coming back to it. There's a particular cruelty in being valued not for who you are, but for what can be taken off you. If you've ever felt like someone in your own life is totting you up quietly, working out what you're worth to them rather than who you are to them, you know how that lands. It's a special kind of cold. And I want you to comment 1, 2, or 3 when we get to the end, because I'm going to need to know whether you'd have done what I did next, or whether you'd have walked away and let it go. Are you all right? Claire asked. Was I all right? Sitting in the house I'd owned for 28 years, the bare trees out the window, the tea gone cold, having just been told that my son, my daughter-in-law, and my brother had built a coordinated medical and legal scheme to chemically wreck my mind, document the wreckage, and take everything I'd spent a lifetime building. I will be, I said. What do? We do this exactly right. Her voice shifted into something clean and decisive. No confrontations, no calls to Daniel, no change in your behavior, nothing that signals a thing has changed on your end. Total surface normality. Do you hear me? I hear you. First move. I'm booking you a full independent cognitive assessment. Court admissible. There's a neurological assessment center near Stockport, run by a Dr. Margaret Yo. She's given expert evidence in 3 elder abuse cases in the Northwest. I've already rung her office. She'd already rung. Before she even gave me the lab results, she'd made the call. We get you assessed clean and on record before they file anything. That document becomes the foundation of everything. Can you come Friday? I'll drive up Thursday night. The line went quiet a moment. I looked at the book still open on my lap, page 61. That same paragraph. Claire. I tried to find the right words somewhere in the wreckage of the last 4 days. I owe you an apology. For the years I let Daniel, Dad, firm, gentle, the voice of someone who's already grieved a thing and come out the other side. Not now. We'll have that conversation, I promise you. But not now. Right now I need you focused and steady. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Good. I'll see you Thursday. She arrived at 7:45 on the Thursday night. I watched from the front window as a silver hatchback with Bristol plates slid into a space on my road in one clean, unhesitating move. She got out in a dark wool coat, document bag over her shoulder, hair pulled back, 31 years old and moving like someone who'd never once been uncertain about where she was going. That walk. That's not her mother's. That's mine. I opened the door before she reached the steps. We stood there a moment, the cold pressing in off the road, the house warm behind me. Then she stepped forward and hugged me hard. The kind of hug that carries the weight of 6 lost years and doesn't try to explain them. You look well, Dad. I look 74, I said. She laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in years. It hit me somewhere behind the breastbone. We worked at the kitchen table until gone midnight. Claire laid it all out in order, the toxicology report, the legal filings her network had surfaced on Marcus Hale, the financial trail tying Daniel's application to the valuation Hale had quietly commissioned. She set each page down with the deliberate care of someone who'd been building this architecture for days. Then she pulled out one more document. Hale's done this before, she said, tapping it. I ran his case history, 3 previous guardianship applications in the north of England, 2 flagged by the local authority safeguarding team for procedural irregularities. He has a pattern, Dad. He finds families with wealthy older relatives, coaches them on building a behavioral record, and files when the file's thick enough. She looked up. Daniel didn't design this on his own. Someone walked him through every single step. My son didn't just betray me. My son hired a professional to help him do it properly. I looked at the papers spread across my kitchen table, the same table where Claire used to do her homework at 12 years old. Back when this house was full and loud and whole. Back before Daniel decided she was expendable. He'd been wrong about that. He'd been wrong about so much. Friday morning we drove out toward Stockport. Claire navigated from the passenger seat, coffees in the cup holders, radio low, just a father and daughter on an ordinary gray morning, which is exactly what it needed to look like. Dr. Yo's facility sat off the main road, clean and quiet and unremarkable, the sort of place that does serious work without telling you about it. I was in with her for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When I came out, Claire was in the waiting room, straight-backed, bag on her lap, completely still in the way that meant her mind was going at full speed underneath. She looked up. Dr. Yo stepped into the doorway behind me, glanced at Claire, and said, without ceremony, "Your father has the cognitive profile of a man 15 years younger. Whatever was going to be claimed about him, there's no medical ground to stand on." I watched 3 things cross my daughter's face in order. Relief, rage, resolve. She stood, shook the doctor's hand, then turned to me with those eyes, her mother's shape, my stubbornness, this impossible combination that produced the most formidable 31-year-old I have ever met. "Right," she said quietly. "Now we build the case." And over the next 12 days, that is precisely what Claire did. If you've been with me this far, do me a favor and let me know in the comments. I'll explain how at the end, but I want to know you're still here. She filed a preemptive counter-application establishing my full legal capacity. Dr. Yo's assessment attached, dated, certified, court admissible. Any guardianship application Daniel filed now would walk straight into a wall he didn't know was there. She submitted the toxicology report, the blister pack, and both sealed bottles to the police safeguarding unit. It was logged as criminal evidence. A detective sergeant, a patient, thorough man called Owusu was assigned, the kind who builds a case from the foundations up, the way I'd have done it. She forwarded the complete trail to the Crown Prosecution Service. Hale's involvement, the drafted application, the weeks of preparation, the prior case history. And then she did one more thing. One quiet, surgical thing she mentioned almost as a footnote while we were clearing the table at 1 in the morning. "I've put in a formal complaint to the compliance department at Daniel's firm," she said. "He's an independent financial advisor. I included a copy of the application naming him as proposed financial deputy over your estate." She stacked the last folder. "That's a textbook conflict of interest for a regulated advisor. They'll have no choice but to act." When did you do that? I asked. Tuesday, she said. Right after I rang you with the lab results. She'd filed it the same day she'd told me the news. Before I'd even asked. Before we'd even discussed it. Daniel was suspended by his firm pending internal review. He had no idea. He was still ringing me every few days to ask if I was taking my drops. Every day, I told him, like clockwork. Let him believe it. Because here is what my son failed to account for when he stood at his front door and pressed 2 bottles of poison into his father's hands with a warm smile. He forgot who raised me. And he badly, catastrophically underestimated who I raised. Now, I want to be fair to him for a moment, because this is the part that still keeps me up. I learned later why he did it, and it wasn't that he'd become a monster overnight. He'd started a business. It had gone bad, properly bad. He owed money to people you don't owe money to. And Brian had come to him in January, when he was at his lowest, and laid the whole thing out, and Daniel had said no. He'd said no at first. I cling to that, in a strange way. It was Rachel, he told me later, who supplied the words that let him say yes, that I was old. That I'd end up in a home or worse soon enough anyway, so taking it now wasn't really taking anything. That was the arithmetic they did on my life. And I understand it. I don't forgive it. But I understand how a frightened, indebted man talks himself into something one small permission at a time. That's how it always happens. Never one monstrous choice, 100 tiny ones. The morning of the day we moved, I woke at 5:45 and made tea. Claire was already at the kitchen table in her socks, hair loose, reading something on her laptop with both hands round a mug. She'd been in the spare room 12 nights. 12 nights of late hours at this table, closed-door phone calls, documents printed and annotated in red and stacked in labeled folders that had slowly colonized the left side of my kitchen. She looked up when I came in. Didn't say good morning, just looked at me steadily and asked, "You ready?" I poured my tea and sat down across from her. More than ready. The trap Claire had built was a masterclass. She hadn't just built a legal defense, she'd laid a criminal mine. Dr. Yo's capacity assessment, sealed and logged with the court. D.S. Owusu's file, signed off by the CPS. The net fully woven. We just needed them all in one room to pull the cord. The plan itself was simple. Simple plans are the only ones that work. I rang Daniel at 9. I told him I needed to sit down with the family about some paperwork that my solicitor had flagged a few things that needed sorting in person before the end of the month. I kept my voice slightly uneven, slightly halting. The voice of an old man navigating something administratively confusing. He agreed before I'd finished the sentence. Of course he did. Estate paperwork, in person. His father muddled and cooperative. As far as Daniel was concerned, Christmas had come early and was standing on his doorstep in a gray overcoat. We settled on 2 o'clock. Claire left my house at 11 in the silver car. 2 stops to make. She didn't elaborate and I didn't ask. I dressed carefully gray trousers, clean shirt, the overcoat, and I stood at the bathroom mirror a moment and looked at the man looking back at me. I straightened my collar and walked out the door. I arrived at 5:55. Rachel opened before I'd knocked, big warm smile, the door swinging with the practiced ease of a woman who'd been watching for my car. "Harold, come in, come in. Can I get you anything? A drink?" "Just water," I said pleasantly. "Thank you, Rachel." She didn't flinch, not even a flicker. Daniel was in the lounge with Brian. Both stood when I came in, that same careful, attentive deference I now recognized for exactly what it was. Not respect, management. Keep the old man calm and comfortable and right where you need him. Dad. Daniel pulled me into a hug. Firm, warm, completely convincing. The embrace of a man who believed he was days from everything. "Glad you came. Sit down, sit down." "In a minute," I said. I looked round that immaculate lounge. The same careful surfaces. The same staging. The last time I'd stood here, I'd been pretending to forget what my fork was for. I wasn't pretending anything today. I checked my watch. 5:02, then 2 minutes to. Daniel settled into his chair with the loose, comfortable confidence of a man holding every card in the deck. "So, paperwork. What's your solicitor flagged?" I looked at my son across the room. 43 years old. My blood, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike along the canal, helped move into his first damp little flat, watched marry Rachel on a bright June afternoon in the registry office. "She's flagged everything," I said. A small silence. Daniel's smile held. The doorbell rang. I want you to slow down with me here, because I have watched a few genuinely unforgettable things in 74 years of living, vessels I surveyed going to sea for the first time. The moment each of my children drew breath, a sunrise over the Mersey from the deck of a tanker on a cold March morning in 1986. This was one of them. I watched my son's face as Claire walked through his front door, and his smile didn't collapse all at once. It went in stages, like a building losing power, floor by floor. First the eyes changed, then the corners of his mouth lost their hold. Then his jaw went just slightly slack before some instinct caught it. Rachel made a sound behind him that wasn't a word. Brian stood up off the sofa, then slowly sat back down. Claire walked in like she owned every inch of the floor beneath her feet. Dark coat, document bag over one shoulder, the complete and total composure of someone who'd been preparing for this exact moment for 12 days. She came and stood beside me and looked at her brother with an expression that held nothing warm in it whatsoever. "Daniel," she said. Just his name, like a full stop at the end of a very long sentence. What Daniel looked from her to me. "Dad, what is this? What's she doing here?" "She's my solicitor," I said. "And my daughter, both of which she's always been. You just chose to forget the second part." Claire set her bag on the coffee table. She opened it without rushing. No drama, no performance, just the clean efficiency of someone who'd done this before and would do it again. The room was so quiet I could hear the wind pressing on the windows. She placed 3 documents on the table, side by side, precise. "The first," she said, her voice the temperature of the pavement outside, "is a certified toxicology report from an independent lab, confirming that the sealed supplement bottles given to my father contain concentrated hyoscine, well above any safe dose. The toxicologist's report classifies the finding as, and I'm quoting, consistent with intentional poisoning." Rachel sat down on the arm of the sofa. Her face had gone the color of the walls. "The second is a draft guardianship and deputyship application prepared by Marcus Hale of Leeds, signed by Daniel and by Brian, along with correspondence establishing a preparation timeline from mid-February. The application names Daniel as guardian and financial deputy over my father's estate." Brian was staring at the carpet. "The third is a court-certified independent cognitive assessment by Dr. Margaret Yeo, dated last week, establishing my father's full legal capacity." She looked up and let her gaze move slowly from Daniel to Rachel to Brian, the same steady, clinical precision. "So, to be very clear about what you did, you deliberately poisoned a fully capable man. You staged, witnessed episodes of decline to manufacture a medical record. And you signed your names to the financial motive for doing it. A beat. You didn't make a mistake. You built a case." She let that sit. "And so did we." Daniel stood up. "Claire, everyone, just calm down. This is—" "Sit down, Daniel." My voice. Different now. He sat down. "I want a solicitor," he said. And something had left his voice. That easy, managed confidence hollowed right out. What was underneath was smaller than I'd expected. Younger, somehow. "That is the first sensible thing you've said since March," Claire replied. "I strongly suggest it." She looked at me and gave the smallest nod. I took out my phone and rang DS Owusu. He answered on the first ring. "We're ready," I said. They came in 2 unmarked cars. No sirens, no theatrical entrance. Just 4 officers, and the quiet procedural efficiency of people who understand that understatement is more devastating than spectacle. Owusu was an unhurried man, the sort who'd done this enough times to know that rushing it cheapens it. He introduced himself at the door, showed his warrant card, and walked into that immaculate lounge like he had all the time in the world. Rachel started crying the moment he began. Not the controlled, managed display I'd seen before. Real crying. The kind that comes when the architecture of a lie collapses all at once, and there's nothing left to hold the face together. Brian wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, hands very still on his knees. Daniel said nothing. He looked at the carpet while Owusu spoke, and I knew from the quality of his silence that he'd already been coached by Hale, or by instinct on exactly what not to say if this moment ever came. He'd planned for the possibility of being caught. That detail, above everything else, was the one that cost me something permanent. The cuffs came out, and that's when Daniel looked up. Not at Claire, not at Owusu, at me. "Dad." His voice broke clean in half on the single word. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe 41 years of needing to understand exactly where a structure failed and why. Maybe something older than that. Maybe I just needed to hear him say it out loud. Why? I asked. Just that. One word. The room went still. And then my son, my 43-year-old son, standing in his lounge with an officer's hand on his arm, started to cry. Not the quiet, dignified kind. The ugly, unraveling kind a man produces when every wall he's built comes down at the same moment. I didn't, Dad. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The business. I had a business, and it went bad. Really bad. I owe people. Serious money. To serious people. And I didn't know what else to do. And Brian, he glanced at his uncle, still staring at the floor. Brian came to me in January. He said there was a way. He laid the whole thing out, and I said no. At first I said no. I said I'm not doing that. But his voice dropped to nothing. Rachel said it wasn't like we were hurting you. She said you were old, you'd end up in a home, or he couldn't finish it. I looked at Rachel. Both hands pressed over her mouth, tears running, not looking up. He was old. He'd end up in a home or gone anyway, so it wasn't really wrong. That was the arithmetic they'd done on my life. Look at me, Daniel, I said. He looked at me. You sat across from me at that table. You counted 11 drops into my glass. You watched me get ill, and you caught your wife's eye over the dinner. My voice stayed even. It surprised me how even it stayed. And then you put 2 more bottles of poison in my hands at the door and told me to take them every day. I let it sit between us. That's not a man who got into trouble and made one bad choice. That's a plan, and you need to own what it is. He was crying too hard to answer. I turned to Owusu. I'm done, I said. Daniel, Rachel, and Brian were each charged with serious offenses causing grievous bodily harm by poisoning, conspiracy, and offenses under the legislation that protects vulnerable adults. Marcus Hale was reported to the Solicitors Regulation Authority and struck off pending criminal investigation for his role in orchestrating the scheme. Daniel was dismissed by his firm the same day the cuffs went on. When the house was empty, it was just Claire and me. The candles Rachel had lit on the mantelpiece were still burning, a small, absurd domestic detail that made the whole afternoon feel slightly unreal. The good plates were just visible through the dining room door. She'd been laying a table for a lunch that was never going to happen. I walked to the front window and looked out at the bare trees, the gray sky, the quiet street going blue in the early dark. A few weeks ago I'd parked right there and walked up that path, genuinely happy about a lemon tart. Claire came and stood beside me. Your estate, she said quietly. The trust documents are filed. Everything's protected. I'm the trustee, but Dad, it's entirely yours. Every decision, every penny. She paused. This was never about the money for me. I knew that. I'd always known that. That was the precise difference between my daughter and my son. One of them looked at me across a table and saw a father. The other looked at me and saw an estate. I know, I said. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. One moment. Then she straightened. Shall I get you out of here? She asked. Yes. We walked out of that house together. I pulled the door shut behind me without looking back. The cold air came at us clean and honest, the best thing I'd felt in weeks. I stopped at the top of the steps. There's a place in town, I said, does a fish and chips that'll make you question every decision that kept you in Bristol. Claire laughed, full and unguarded and real. My daughter's laugh, the one I hadn't heard enough of in 6 years. It landed somewhere deep and necessary. Lead the way, old man, she said. Old man. I smiled and walked down the steps. The case went to court the following spring. I sat in that room in my gray trousers and clean shirt on the day of sentencing and listened to a judge speak in the precise, formal language of the law. And what she said, stripped to its essence, was this. What was done to Harold Whitlock was not a family disagreement. It was a crime. Daniel got 4 years. Rachel 3, Brian 2.5. Hale was facing his own separate proceedings. I did not feel triumphant walking out of that court. I want to be honest about that, because I think you deserve the honest version. You do not feel triumphant when your son goes to prison. You feel the accumulated weight of every year, every phone call, every family lunch, every moment you wish you'd seen sooner and didn't. But underneath that weight, solid and load-bearing and permanent, I felt something else, clarity. The specific clarity of a man who's been lied to for a very long time and has finally, completely, stopped being lied to. The feeling of a fever breaking, of a long winter ending, of putting down something heavy you carried so long you forgot it was never yours to carry. So here's what this taught me, and then I'll let you go. The mistake most of us make is believing that love and harm can't live in the same person. They can. The people closest to you have the most access, and access is the only thing harm ever needs. What Claire understood that nobody else in that room did was that you fight that kind of thing with patience and paper, not with shouting. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do today, if you've got an older parent, or you are one. Know exactly who has access to your affairs, and make sure there's one person in your life whose love for you has nothing to do with what you're worth. That one person can save your whole life. Mine did. And here's the question I want you to sit with. If the truth about someone you loved was hidden in plain sight, would you let yourself see it? Or would your own love be the thing that blinds you? I'd really like to know where you stand on all this, so do me a favor. Comment 1 if you think I did the right thing. Comment 2 if you think I should have confronted him that very first night in the kitchen. Comment 3 if you think I should have just walked away and let the law find them on its own. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? I read these, all of them. And if you've ever had someone in your own life look right through who you are and only see what they could take, tell me about it. I want to hear it. If this story meant something to you, the kindest thing you could do is subscribe and stick around. There are more of these to come, and I'd be glad to have you here for them. Thank you for listening, genuinely. It means more than you know. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Manchester to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.